Great. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our monthly meeting. My name is Ibrahim Coulibaly. I'm the president of Human Right Human Stories. Human Right Human Stories is a nonprofit organization based in Eugene. What we do, we talk about the issues that matter to our community, and we have a conversation with people who work around those issues, people who have some relevant information for the community. So today we will be talking about human trafficking. As you know, human trafficking is a problem around the world, in the United States and in Oregon as well. We all hear many times about human trafficking in Eugene. So my hope is by the end of this meeting, you will learn more about human trafficking, and you probably join the conversation or approach the law enforcement or social workers who work around this issue. Today, I'm joined by two wonderful people who work around those issues here in Eugene or in Oregon or nationwide. So I'm gonna let my panelists to introduce themselves. So first, we go to Florence.
Hi, hello. I'm Florence Mackey. I'm a victim specialist with the FBI in the Portland division. I sit in Eugene, but cover 15 counties here in Oregon. I've been working with victims of crime for all of my career, both in a medical setting as a forensic interviewer and working in the prosecutor's office as a victim advocate back in New England. I've been with the Bureau 5 years, and I only offer that background information because throughout my career working with victims, I have seen cases of human trafficking, and it's something that has followed me through my career. With the Bureau, I work human trafficking and violent crimes against children, and those cases seem to dominate my caseload. So I'm happy to be here this morning. It's an important topic.
Thank you for being with us this morning. And we have Kate Cawood.
Good morning. My name's Kate Cawood. I work in marketing and public relations, but my previous job, I was 15 years as a school counselor. I've worked grades kindergarten through high school. And I was surprised how little we were taught initially about human trafficking and how different cases came across my desk throughout my career and how important it is to build awareness. And it was really kind of later, probably 10 years plus before we had some information about what to look for or possible cases. And so hopefully through this panel, we can start to build some awareness, especially for those that work directly with children and families. We have such an intimate connection to families, and whether a child has been previously trafficked or an older child may be beginning to go down that path, building that awareness with school counselors and educators, I think is a very important piece to this conversation. So I'm excited to be here and to learn more.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to join Human Stories around this conversation. So I'm going to go back to Florence. What should the community know about human trafficking? You are muted.
Thank you. I think it's important to understand that human trafficking can happen to anyone, but there are some people that are more vulnerable, and there are significant risk factors that go along with that. It could be a recent migration or relocation, substance abuse, mental health concerns, you know, a child or adolescent being in the child welfare system, being a runaway or a homeless youth. And I think that homelessness, especially in our area, is a big consideration. I think that there are a lot of myths surrounding human trafficking, and we can go into what some of the indicators are later on, but I think traffickers prey on a vulnerable population. And we as, teachers and nurses and social workers, faith-based leaders, and the community at large are likely to encounter someone who's being human trafficked, but they may not recognize it or be able to identify it. And so I think it is important to learn about the signs and the indicators, and that's the first step towards making a difference.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we are more likely at least once in our lifetime we will walk past somebody who is being trafficked without knowing what's going on. Kate, during your years working as a counselor, what have you observed in the school system that may make people be more concerned? Who were like the age range of the youth who were targeted, and if there is also a specific gender or sexual orientation that may be victim?
I think, it really, from my experience, it can happen at any age. There were, in my career, I think, like Florence had mentioned, the biggest vulnerabilities that I saw were instability in housing, instability in family structures. So like with younger children, I worked with children who had been trafficked for drug use by their parents. So it's interesting because what I considered to be human trafficking, I guess I never had looked at it through some very specific lenses. And learning to identify it, we talk about it, but often people don't think about it right here, right? And it can happen right here in so many different kinds of scenarios, and being aware of those kind of scenarios. With older children, it's those kids that are often unhoused or runaways, or those kids that disappear. In our school systems, they're pretty overloaded. So like when children don't show up the next school year or drop off, and I know that we try to track that to make sure that they enroll somewhere else, but there are children, especially in the older population, that once they hit a certain age, they can become runaways, or they can disappear into the system or into the unknown, and that's where they become the most vulnerable. So it's being aware of that and talking to kids, and I think for me as a counselor, it was really looking through those different lenses, that it wasn't just this topic that we talked about kind of in a, more of a generalized term, but really understanding maybe specific scenarios that would create the vulnerability, watching for those scenarios and making those connections and following up. So if a kid did fall off the radar or drop out and disappear, it's trying to network with other kids, like what happened, where are they? So it's just really beginning to look at it differently and having more conversations with each other about what it can look like and watching for those signs.
Thank you. It's I was thinking about it, how as somebody who doesn't necessarily work with youth directly most of the time, and live in Eugene here, when walking downtown, sometimes kind of see a group of young people, it makes me concerned. I don't know if they're always looking at, are these people victims of human trafficking, or what they are doing here? So Florence, my question would be, Is there like a specific profile for a type of criminal who may engage in those kind of situation, or it could be anyone?
Are you're asking about traffickers?
Yeah, the traffickers.
You know, it's interesting. I think most people don't look at human trafficking as a business, and it really is a business. And both labor trafficking and sex trafficking, the victim is really the commodity. And it's always trafficker directed. You know, many times there might be a commercial front business, whether it's the massage parlor industry or labor trafficking, you know, illegal marijuana grows that bring in persons to work in that industry. And it could be family directed, like Kate mentioned. It's not uncommon that we see that. We also live in a time where this industry, if you want to call it that, has an advantage that everything can be done on the internet. You can access victims, especially the vulnerable population of adolescents on the internet. And first of all, you know, kids communicate that way. Most people communicate that way. There is a dark web that we know about. And also the traffickers are able to communicate. It is a business model. The people that seek, you know, kids or adolescents or you know, trafficking victims, they can access how to be provided that service on the internet. So it's very, very hard. It's really not as concrete and out in front of us as we would like. I think it's changed how we look at these cases a lot. But traffickers, they communicate. It goes, you know, throughout the United States. A trafficker in New York might be communicating with a trafficker in Seattle. We know that we often talk about that I-5 corridor that goes from Mexico to Canada. You know, you have these major cities in between. I-5 is just a straight shot with stopovers in LA and San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and then small communities like Eugene and Salem and Medford. You know, it's a huge industry, and there's, you know, there's a way for them to move victims through that system, through trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking.
Wow. Yeah, I myself, I never thought about human trafficking as a business. Now it really makes sense that there's organized crime around it. So people are probably moving along with moving money, moving drugs, moving other things that are illegal as well. Kate, during your years as counselor, would you say that the school system was proactive and looking for signs, looking for vulnerable people, or it was your contact will be triggered by a reporting, or you know, either someone coming to you or someone raising concern to you about a student?
Yeah, this is a great question, because, you know, as a counselor and a mandatory reporter, which we all are, you know, in the school system, you're always, you know, reporting things that feel questionable, for sure. And that's what we do to protect children. What I found was different around human trafficking is that it was almost more subtle. It wasn't like watching for the signs as I built my awareness around it. It wasn't things that you would necessarily pick up the phone and make a DHS call for. You didn't have specifics. It was more looking for some patterns, looking for things that made you go, something doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it. And so once I began to understand what some of the signs were, or looking for some of the patterns, that shifted things a little bit more, because it is very subtle. And there are things that we don't even think about. For instance, like, as my awareness built around human trafficking, like large sports events, I didn't understand that those were big targets. Understanding how the I-5 corridor affects things. And then even something as simple as, even looking at through that lens, also realizing that small communities in Oregon are affected with human trafficking because of poverty issues. And so being aware that, you might be in a very, very small rural area, and that trafficking is happening there. So it's just really building a bigger lens of what to be looking for, and also looking for those patterns that may not be your initial instinct to call DHS or to reach out, because you don't have anything concrete, but there's enough little pieces that start to build that you're like, this doesn't feel quite right. So that's what I've learned in this process.
Wow, great. Well, you kind of pick up pieces here and there and connect the dot, and somebody may be vulnerable. Florence, what is the magnitude of human trafficking in our area here, Eugene, or Lane County in general?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you a little bit nationally, and then break it down so you have some comparison. But and this is a statistic from 2019, but Polaris operates a human trafficking hotline, and in 2019 they had over 11,000. They worked over 11,000 situations of human trafficking. Wow. Which out of those 11,000, over 22,000 individual had individuals victims. Nearly over 4,000 of those were traffickers, and then close to 2,000 included suspicious businesses. So what Kate and I both know is that human trafficking is so underreported that if those numbers, they seem staggering. Just imagine that that's a fraction of what we're seeing. In Lane County, Lane County is the third largest county to have reports of human trafficking. Multnomah County is first, and Clackamas County is second. I did inquire of SAS, which is the Sexual Assault Support Services here in Lane County, kind of what their numbers were looking like. And they also agreed that they're extremely underreported. But they said that they responded to last year over 105 cases of human trafficking just in the emergency departments at local hospitals. And again, those only are a fraction of the number of cases that are happening in our community. And I've responded to cases at the hospital, and they're very, very hard, because hospital staff, as you know, especially with COVID and everything else that's happened in our healthcare system, there just isn't the time. The emergency department is a very, it's a quick, acute care setting where nurses and doctors don't really have the time to do a proper assessment of whether, a person is being trafficked. They may come in with a multitude of symptoms, and many times their trafficker has brought them in and is in the waiting room. So these people are not going to self-report. And that's been my experience in the emergency department. It's quite sad, because they just get up and leave, and there's not a lot you can do about it.
Well, as an immigrant myself, I also, in New York in particular, I realized that some people within the immigrant community try to kind of lure new immigrant into working for someone, and usually they don't get paid. I hear a lot in the African community, West African community where I'm from. And my day job, I work for the Bureau of Labor and Industries as a senior investigator. Now we have a new program, a new unit, housing unit, but also has a component of farm workers. And having a conversation with some of my coworkers, they also told me how it is not uncommon to find people working in some farms and they don't get paid. They take their passport away, and they kind of keep them there to work basically for free. So what would you say, what do you want people to know on how to maybe spot or become more aware of what's going around them, so they can probably step in or get law enforcement involved?
Well, I think, with both labor and sex trafficking, people are indebted. They are fearful of leaving their trafficker because with labor trafficking, they might have their passport, they might have, they may have been brought over here illegally and now they're indebted to their trafficker. They may have been threatened that if they leave or if they tell anyone about being trafficked or being held against their will, that their family will be killed. I think there's that fear and that coercion and that being fraudulently brought into a situation. I know there's a lot of people that come over here that are labor trafficked that are seeking a better life, and they and then they get here and they're stripped of everything. And it's very isolating, especially, for example, marijuana grows in our state. They're in rural locations. These people have no means to seek help. You want to kind of look for, and I know Kate, weigh in on this as well, please, that, when you see a kid who is really disconnected from their family, they could be homeless, they could have a substance abuse issue, or they could present as having kind of, nice jewelry, their hair is done, their nails are done, they're looking good. That's also a way in which a trafficker kind of ingratiates or grooms a victim. And then once they've been given all of those niceties, they are ingratiated and they're brought into work. Okay, now you have to pay for that. Lots of times young people are given substances and have a substance abuse addiction, which, they're not going to leave their trafficker because their trafficker supplies them with substances. You want to, lots of times, especially with homeless youth or a homeless person, it doesn't have to be, the commodity doesn't have to be money. They could be sold because they need shelter or they need food, that they need just the basics to be taken care of. And so they're exchanging sex for shelter, safety, food, drugs. Kate, you talked about in the school system, is that child, adolescent, are they attending school? If not, where are they? Are they home? Are they on the streets? Does a person, like have a lack of personal possessions, but yet they appear to be living in a stable living situation. You know, it just doesn't seem congruent. Especially when you see a person in the emergency department, or you know, does that person have the freedom of movement? Are they always being, do they always have to be somewhere when you know they don't have anywhere to be, or they have to, you know, they're obligated to someone or something. You know, there are so many factors and indicators that it's, you know, those are some of the basics.
And I think that just builds upon, it can look like so many different things. It's not just someone that might be unhoused, like you mentioned, you know, it's watching for those subtle behaviors, the nervousness, the shutting down when you start to ask questions, you know, are you okay? Or how are things going at home? Or watching for kids. I found this in kind of the high school population that were disconnected from their parents, for example. Maybe they had left home and were living with a friend. Looking for those subtle things that aren't making sense. They don't add up exactly. And just being aware that it can look like so many different things.
Yeah.
Wow. That's that, you know, it's very concerning to see a lot of young adults or teenagers by themselves, you know, late at night around, you know, downtown Eugene. And so the question is, do you know if the school system has like a reporting system, or people have to go to their teachers or social worker or nurses to report? Because I'm asking that question because the trust might be broken between people who directly work with kids or you know, within the school system, or people who look or appears to have some kind of authority over a kid. They usually don't trust those people, but they may be willing to talk to a third party. I don't know if the school system has something like that.
I think, you know, as far as like how we report exactly, or getting kids to feel comfortable to come to us and report. I know, like when I was working in the schools, having an SRO on campus was really a positive in this conversation, because having that resource officer, building those relationships with kids, being very visible, I found that there was maybe a little bit more of a trust level built, and we all worked together very closely, you know, having conversations about, you know, what are your thoughts on what might be going on here, or have you seen this, you know? So we do network, we do talk, and try to build those little pieces. I think what's difficult is that, you know, in Lane County we have over 700 unhoused youth, and we have under 15 shelter beds in the Eugene Springfield area for youth under 18. So, you know, you start to look at like the whole picture. And I know this is kind of a very specific population, but looking at the unhoused kids and how quickly they can disappear out of the school system because of being unhoused. So there's just so many layers to this conversation. And how we build trust with kids. But I think a big piece to this is building maybe more awareness in people that do work with children. Like Florence had mentioned like faith leaders, any, you know, coaches, kids that are in sports. It can be anybody who's connected to children, connected to youth, and can build those relationships to start looking for these patterns. So building that awareness.
Thank you. And yes, I think the building the trust is key for youth to trust their the the staff around them, and to go to them to report suspicious behavior. First, as a victim advocate, what are the resources you have out there for victims? What assistance they can get to when they decide to either report the trafficker or to get out of the situation they are in?
Well, I think that there aren't as many as we would like. I think the most important thing is to first really talk to them about how they're doing. You really have to start with the basics, like, are you hungry? You know, they need an emergent situation to keep them safe for housing, and then they need long-term, and this isn't a quick fix. You know, we have you in a shelter for 3 nights and then you're going to be good. I mean, there's so many systemic issues. There might be family issues, substance abuse issues. So, you know, my go-to is to really connect with them on the basics about how they're doing. I'm not going to talk with them about their trafficked victimization at all. I want to know if they're hungry, do they need clothing? You know, that's where the conversation has to start, because no one has really been asking them that. They've been asking them to do other things. I'm going to connect with NGOs, which is a non-governmental organization, to find out, do you have a transitional living program for unhoused youth? You know, this youth might need detox. And that youth might need a much longer term transitional housing setting, especially if they're not comfortable going back to their family. The other thing is that these individuals, these victims, feel very unsafe when they reveal that they've been trafficked. It's a very tight-knit network, and a lot of these unhoused youths that being trafficked, they know each other. And so safety is a real issue. So lots of times, you know, relocating them to a safer environment is really imperative. We want to take care of their medical needs. So being connected with, you know, Lane County has Kids First, which is our child advocacy center, and they have trained forensic interviewers there. They have trained medical staff there. We have SANE nurses in our emergency departments so you want, if they're ready for that, you know, to also take care of their health needs. You know, I think that there's kind of, you know, a barrier when it comes to providing victims and survivors services because of the humiliation, because of the fear. So building a good network of people in your community, service providers that you can work with is essential. So I would, you know, I want to know detox centers. I want to know shelters, not just in Eugene, but in other areas for safety reasons. I want to know who are the medical providers that I can call even after hours for a youth that may be having some health issues. I want to know about long-term housing. I also want to know, and many of the young people that I work with, they want to get back to school. They're smart. They want an education. And so those are important factors when dealing with that population.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know one of the things that I struggled with in the school system is the familiarity, right? These kids are connected into their friends, this is their community, this is the people that they know, and how challenging it is to get them removed from situations because it is familiar. Even if it is bad, there's a comfort level in the familiar. And so knowing that there's options to help them move into maybe a different community, to get away from this network, to get away from, you know, who is trafficking them, to know that those resources are available, that they don't have to stay in the community that they're in, they can seek help, and then for safety reasons be moved outside of that. Because I find that kids that we do try to triage and that we do try to support, so often they fall back into that familiar space, and that's a vulnerability.
Yeah. And I also know that Child Protective Services, DHS, once a kid reaches a certain age, they just really can't hold them. There's not a lot they can do. And there's a, you know, that could be 16 years old, and that age gap between 16 and 18, they really fall through the cracks. You know, DHS isn't able to hold them accountable. There is not out-of-state resources for trafficked youth, and in state we only have 2 residential treatment programs for you know, trafficked females. I don't think there's anything there for trafficked males, which is an underreported population to a great
I'm
extent.
actually really glad you brought that up, because that was something that came up in my career, was working with kids that were 18, but they were still in high school, and they don't qualify for different services. They fall in under a different umbrella. I won't go into specifics other than I had a young man who was 18, still in high school, trying to finish, and found himself unhoused. The only option available was the mission, and having an 18-year-old kid
Yeah.
at the mission wasn't a good scenario. That was not best case scenario, because that opens up a whole different level of vulnerability.
Yeah.
So, you know, we networked our resources to keep him off the streets, and we were able to be successful, but it took a lot of footwork, a lot of community effort internally, a lot of networking to make that happen. So we often think only female, but that isn't the case. It can be anybody, and even past the age of 18. In my mind, they're still kids. You know, they're still kids up into their early 20s. I've known of cases where young people have gone off to college and have been trafficked, right here in Eugene.
Yes.
And it's kids at the U of O, you know, trying to go to school, and they don't quite have enough money to they have enough to maybe to get through tuition, but not enough to live on, and become very vulnerable. So it's really looking at it from multiple lenses, that it's not just one specific thing.
You know, you mentioned something that's very important, and that is, you know, culture has really changed. We're really media driven, we're really internet driven, we're electronically driven, and so that's how people communicate. And so there's also, through the media, you know, kind of a desensitization of sexuality and kind of sex as a commodity. And so I think you mentioned the college population, and, you know, that is such a vulnerable population. You know, first of all, they're connected online, and I think that if given a situation where someone is vulnerable and someone is short on money, it can be just an easy fix for them, right? But it's not, because, you know, there are a lot of what's the right word? There's a lot of leverage that traffickers have, and you know, once you enter that system, that network, it's very difficult to get out.
It appears that the human trafficking itself has other crimes that revolve around human trafficking, like drug smuggling or distributions, drug distribution, or I hear that there is another kind that's even horrible. It's like organ organ harvesting. They traffic people that to get part of their body and just to sell it. I don't know who buy those things, but it's horrible to even think about it. Have we seen an increase or a decrease in the human trafficking in our area, or is that looking at your work? Are you getting more and more involved in a situation where here in Lynn County or in Oregon, are you getting more cases of human trafficking, or it is this crime is kind of slowing down?
Gosh, I don't have the numbers, Ibrahim. In my experience, in my work, I don't feel that it's slowing down. I think, again, it's underreported. And I do think that, we have a lot of cases that are sextortion cases where, kids are sought after online. And in some cases, these people are meeting up with these kids. It's not just sextorting them online, and that's a whole other program. But in some cases, they're meeting up with kids. If you don't, I'm going to be coming there. We're going to meet up. I'm going to show your picture to everybody. I mean, so the internet, again, has opened channels for traffickers to have access to a vulnerable population. Wow. I don't see that it's slowing down right now.
Wow. Kate, what's your perception?
I just think it's so underreported. I think I've worked with vulnerable children for a long time. I just didn't understand. It took me a long time to really fully understand the trafficking component. And so the more I understood it, the more you begin to see it, or you begin to hear stories. So I think it's really underreported. Yeah. And it was interesting, Florence, you mentioned, the piece online. Even something as simple as I recently, a couple months ago, came across a very questionable Craigslist ad that made me kind of look at it and go, well, it seemed harmless at first glance, and then I was like, that doesn't feel right. So I actually had to contact the EPD, and I called them up and sent over the information. But even it goes back to the subtlety of that doesn't sit right, and maybe just through more conversation, more awareness, learning what to be looking for, or looking for those signs, something that may seem very harmless. If you look at it a little closer, you're like, well, what exactly are they offering here? This doesn't feel right. So that's what makes me just feel like if it's bubbling up even above the dark web, it's more around than I think we realize. Yeah. Or at least more around than I think I realized. Even, kind of looking at scenarios about work trafficking around nannies, for instance, being brought in, or like a house cleaner, or services. That's another level of awareness that I think we don't talk a lot about, is that this can be happening in any socioeconomic ladder. It's not just surrounding poverty. It actually can happen in any neighborhood and in any socioeconomic group. So it's watching for those things. Maybe it's a nail technician, or you just don't know. So it's watching for those signs.
I watched a documentary about a diplomat from Africa, I believe. Actually, two. One was from, I believe, India, and the other one was from Africa, where they had the personnel at the house were kept pretty much against the will, the passport and everything else. They were getting physical violence and working almost 20 hours a day and not getting paid. And that was overwhelming. Okay, we have about 10 minutes. What are some of the way you want the community to be more involved in, more engaged? How someone who today decide that, okay, let me try to be part of the solution, kind of look around and see what I can do. What would be the few steps you would advise them to take?
I think there are two things I think that are important. Number one is that if you suspect something, make a report, and don't ever approach a trafficker or sometimes a victim, because that can put them in a very unsafe situation. But make that report. I'm going to give the number to the hotline at the end of our talk, and Ibrahim, I'm going to email you some other numbers that you can send out for reporting purposes. But please do make a report. Call local law enforcement and make a report to the hotline. I think it's important for people to understand the vulnerabilities that trafficked persons face. You know, there's fear, isolation. There's a stigma that they may feel that their community or their family is going to harbor. They're going to be seen. You know, they can never undo what has happened to them, and they feel like that's their identity now. Guilt, shame. They may feel very isolated from their faith community. There's also this dynamic that occurs with this misplaced loyalty to a trafficker, because they may have given them shelter and food and taken care of them, or stepped in a maybe a kind of parental role or a romantic role inadvertently, and then that therefore manipulates that victim. It makes it very difficult for them to come forward. And then you combine that with fear. We have to remember that sometimes victims are trafficked by a romantic partner, a spouse, a family member, or even a parent. And I think that's why it can be happening in your community. I'm certain it's happening in your community, but those are the things that you need to think of kind of out of the box. It's not, you know, the stereotypical trafficking scenario.
Thank you for that, Kate.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, the biggest thing I think I can encourage people is to always report. Even if it's subtle, you know, I've heard educators say, well, there wasn't anything, you know, there's not something specific. But when I would explain to them that the minute you report, it creates a file, and it may not be that there's a lot to report, but those files begin to build, and you don't know what's already been collected by DHS. And so you may just be adding a piece to the puzzle. So always report, even if it's a subtle piece that you're just like, I don't know, it's not something specific. That's okay, because you don't know what they already have. You don't know what's already on file. And it may be that puzzle piece that you know, launches that investigation to see what is going on here. So always report when you suspect. I mean, we always report because we're mandatory reporters, but even if it's something that you're not quite sure about, report it every single time. The other piece that I really encourage people that work with youth, seek trainings. It wasn't until I had done some very specific trainings around this topic that my lens really changed on what to look for, and what the entire situation, maybe in case that there's so many different kinds of trafficking and what that can look like. So I would just encourage, go to trainings or ask for trainings, ask for experts to be brought in. Yeah, we had some trainings for counselors specifically brought in to Eugene 4J, and it was incredibly powerful and really built on that awareness. And I just kept thinking, every educator needs this training to be aware. So always report and seek that training, learn more about it.
Thank you. And yeah, training is very important because you don't know what you don't know. If you don't have the keys to read the situation before you, you may miss a lot of the cues that you can take from that situation. So now talking about reporting, Florence, how people will report, who should they contact and how?
Well, you can always contact your local law enforcement, but just like Kate, I encourage you to report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And I'll give you that number and I'll include it in my email as well. And I have some numbers for Oregon, but that's 1-888-373-7888. And that's the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
Good. Well, with that, we are closer to the end of our panel. Is there anything that we have not touched on and you want to talk about?
I'm just so appreciative that you brought this topic up, and I agree with Kate that training and knowledge is what we need moving forward.
Okay.
I'm just excited that we had this opportunity to build awareness and to keep having this conversation. And I think that the more people we reach, the more awareness that we'll have around what's happening in our community, and also being able to build more resources in our community to help and support those that are vulnerable.
I want to really thank you for taking the time to join me today. I want to remind our audience that today we had a panel to talk about human trafficking, and I was joined by Florence McKay from the FBI and Kate Cawood from Cawood Industries. Well, I would say industries, I don't know. Kate is actually out of the country, but she stayed up late to join us. And I want to thank you, Kate. I want to thank you, Florence. I think as you have heard, this is a big problem in our community. We all see it. Sometimes we don't know what's happening, but I would probably better to always report, have us, the expert, to come take a look at it and determine if there is a problem. Then you would maybe help someone to regain their freedom instead of just walking away and say, well, maybe I'm wrong. I think it's always good to get the person, the expert to come in. So I would say report, and contact your local law enforcement, contact the FBI. You can do that online. They have hotline that you can call. You don't have to leave your name, just report what you're seeing. It's very important because we've seen it that more and more crime is going off the roof because of that. They have people that they can smuggle in the country, or they can snatch from their parents, young kids, with false promises, and they find themselves, we all know that at some point kids have that urge to, gain more freedom, more money, and do what they want to do. so they become more vulnerable to predators. So let us help law enforcement to kind of tackle this crime. And if you see something, say something. And that's the way we'll be able to make a better community. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Human Rights, Human Stories Online. You can find us on Facebook, find us on online. You can go on our website. The website would keep building the website, but you have some information there. You have our videos, and if you want to join the conversation, send us an email. And if you have any topic you want us to talk about, we will help you to find the professionals to come here and address these issues. Very soon we'll start meeting in person in Eugene, and our next panel will be about what happened during World War II to the Japanese American, and that would be a great panel too, like this one on February 24th. So if you have time, look for the Facebook event and join us for that conversation. Thank you for joining us.